Now, here's where we get to the gist of it. Are we really supposed to believe as true this story about sticks causing sheep to breed certain colored offspring? How about a staircase in which angels go back and forth between heaven and earth? How about a man using a rock as a pillow and then pouring olive oil on it to commemorate the spot he had a vision? Later still, Jacob fighting an angel and winning. Wouldn't such primitive myths stated as fact in the Bible diminish its veracity? In order to provide a way to think about this, I want to share something with you that came as an epiphany to me really over 30 years ago. At a church I was attending, it was what they called Missionary Week. And 1 week per year, missionaries from various parts of the world would come to speak in hopes of raising support for their particular ministry. And one such missionary was a gray-haired woman of around 70 years old who had served in the field in Africa for many years and spent the bulk of her time living with one specific, rather primitive tribe. And she had witnessed many strange things in her years there, but none so strange and miraculous as one particular encounter that she told us about. She had had some success in getting just a few, at least, of the tribe she had ministered to accept Christ. A girl of about 14 was one of those saved. And one day, word came that a nearby warlike tribe was coming to raid the tribe she lived among. Now, raids like this were not uncommon, and it happened for the purpose of stealing things like food, but also to take people, kidnap people, in order to bolster the size of their own tribe while diminishing the size of the tribe they raided. Well, people in her tribe there were panicking and hurrying to pack up whatever they could to flee, when much too soon they heard the unmistakable sounds of the raiding party as it approached them from the jungle. So this 14-year-old girl ran to the edge of her village and she confronted the raiders just as they were about to pounce. She raised one hand in the air and prayed for God to stop them. The raiders froze in their tracks, in whatever position they were in, just like something out of a sci-fi movie. They remained frozen in place for a good half hour, all right, until the tribe they were about to raid got well away. Once they unfroze, being conscious of what had happened to them, they turned and ran back into that jungle, terrified. The missionary says she saw this with her own eyes. Now, interestingly, that missionary did not try to explain or justify this hard-to-believe event. She merely said that through this, God had taught her that He will work with people of every kind within the context of their own culture, of their own circumstance, and that we need to learn to accept this reality. The truth is, I am a natural-born skeptic. I have a witness right here. I suspect some of you may be closet skeptics too. Okay. Now, I had always laughed off stories and news of such things as this that I just told you about. I mean, When it comes to miracles, we in the West often feel that these less advanced societies are supposed to experience God in the same way we might. And when we hear things like what I just told you about, we tend to just scoff at them and say that this is some kind of a myth or fantasy or superstition, that these primitive, uneducated people are just misinterpreting it. Events like that missionary told us about represent something that typically happens in isolation. And it can't be proved other than by testimonies of people. But since that time, I've kind of put my skepticism on the back burner regarding such matters, and I accept them as truthful. The unintended consequence of this is that it has helped me to accept these odd happenings in the Bible without the skepticism I once held for them. So, when we read in Genesis 28 that Jacob saw angels ascending to heaven and descending back to earth on a stairway, in Genesis 30, about the fast population growth of Jacob's goats and his sheep due to these wooden sticks. Later in Genesis 32, when Jacob wrestles with that weird spirit being, it was God revealing something to him, performing miracles in a context Jacob could understand. It happened in a form and a manner that Jacob could culturally identify with and accept it, even if it was still overwhelming for him to contemplate. Folks, Jacob's context was not 21st century America. It was the Middle East of about 1800 BC. This is something we have to keep in mind, not only when reading some of the mysterious Bible stories of the ancient past, but also when in our time we hear of some pretty strange encounters people in less advanced places have had with God. Now, the lesson to be learned is that God meets us where we are, in the context of who we are. So now I want to share with you a very recent, rather unbelievable story from Israel. About a half dozen soldiers experienced as they fought in Gaza. Now, this story is this. As a result of Hamas's attack upon Israel on October 7th, 2023, and Israel's subsequent invasion of Gaza, that Hamas built somewhere between 200 and 300 miles of tunnels in Gaza for the purpose of terror, transporting and hiding weapons, hiding their fighters. Several of these tunnels surface in southern Israel. Well, a company of about 25 Israeli soldiers from the Golani Brigade is one of the several companies that have been tasked with the dangerous duty of discovering and clearing out these miles of tunnels. I mean, it just freaks me out to even think about it. Well, the technique is that when discovering a tunnel, 5 or 6 soldiers will go into it to check it out. And the remaining soldiers of the unit would guard over the structure that always housed the tunnel entrance so that the terrorists couldn't come and attack the soldiers that were searching within those tunnels. In this case, it was in an ordinary house in Gaza that had a tunnel entrance emanating from it. The unit's commander went ahead of his men, and he entered the tunnel alone, telling his men to wait for him. Time passed. He hadn't returned. The unit had lost radio contact with him. The other 5 soldiers waiting inside the house decided they needed to go into that tunnel to find him. But as they approached the tunnel entrance, they encountered what they called a tzaddik. In Hebrew, you would just say it's a holy man. Okay? standing there, absolutely just stood in their way. All right. Now, to modern Israelis, the term holy man, is tzaddik, is most often applied to ultra-Orthodox rabbis. Okay, and so the man standing there looked exactly like an ultra-Orthodox rabbi with a long beard and all the typical garb. Of course, the soldiers were shocked to find a Jewish rabbi in Gaza, standing at the tunnel entrance, and asked what in the world he was doing there. How did he get there in the first place? Well, the rabbi answered by saying that the men needed to leave immediately. Don't go into that tunnel. Now, the soldiers really got worried now. And they asked more questions to the rabbi. But all he did was continue to admonish them to leave. Finally, the sergeant that was leading that group of 5 reached out and said, enough of this. And he pushed the rabbi aside. Problem is, his hand went right through him. Now, the soldiers' irritation turned to fright. And they were not sure what in the world is going on here. They didn't know what to do. At that moment, their commander that had gone ahead of them returned from inside the tunnel, and he too encountered that rabbi. And just like the other soldiers, he was, of course, stunned to find a rabbi there, and he asked him some questions. The rabbi refused to move. All he kept saying was they got to leave immediately, he kept saying, or there's going to be many orphans and widows. The officer attempted to walk around the rabbi. Instead, he walked through him. Now, at this point, all the soldiers decided that whatever that thing was, whatever that figure was, it was real, and they believed him. So they ran out of that house. Almost immediately, an enormous explosion leveled the structure they had been in just moments before. Had the men remained to search the tunnel, many of them would have died. Now, in telling the story, the men were certain, they said, they had met a malach, an angel. And I'm sure they're correct. But what's this about him looking like an ultra-Orthodox rabbi? Well, if we think about it, it makes perfect sense. Just like for Jacob, God operated within these Jewish soldiers to protect these men within the cultural context they could identify with, regardless if it applies to any other culture. I have no doubt that when this war with Hamas is over, we're going to hear of many, many strange reports of absolutely inexplicable things that saved Jewish lives. I know of at least one other I don't have the time to share with you today. That these stories are of miraculous things that happen in a uniquely Jewish backdrop, something the average Westerner wouldn't even understand, makes them no less accurate, no less truthful than the stories of Jacob and the ladder, the spotted sheep, and pretty soon his all-night wrestling match with an angel. The bottom line is that we need not look with doubt at some of these strange stories reported in the Bible. We need to confidently accept them. We need to realize that our merciful and omniscient God bends his will to deal with us in ways each of us in every age need, so that we can recognize and understand it's him that's working in our lives. If you have doubts about something miraculous happening in your life, it has absolutely no human explanation. Erase the doubts. Just give glory to God. God loves you. He loves all of his creatures. So much, he will guide us and help us in exactly the way you and I need at that moment. Would you bow your heads in prayer, please?